Let's take you then to that briefing. Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan briefing the media on the latest challenges at Eskom.
We could put more facts before you, but also provide you with some reassurances about what level 6 actually means, how it might impact on us, but more importantly, what caused the country to get to the point where we have level 6 of load shedding. But importantly, to also indicate the kind of efforts that the management and some of the staff, and hopefully by tomorrow all of the staff of Eskom will be putting in order to restore Eskom to some level of normality following on the illegal industrial action that has been going on since the 22nd of June. So what are the facts? The facts are that given the winter season, the demand on Eskom's availability of megawatts is 32,000 approximately. Secondly, what Eskom is normally capable of delivering is somewhere around 28 to 30,000 under normal circumstances. But where there are breakdowns, where there are disruptions, then we are informed by Eskom in order to protect the transmission grid that there would be
You are muted, Minister. Mr. Gordhan, please can I disturb you? You are muted, sir, you've just muted yourself. There we go, thank you.
I've been busy talking to myself, my apologies. So once again, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining us during this press conference. And I take this unusual step of adding to what the CEO of Eskom has said earlier today about the status of the electricity system in South Africa. And I actually address you from the control center, which monitors the production of electricity throughout the country, whether it is by the coal power stations, by the nuclear power station Koeberg, or the imports that we get from Cahora Bassa in Mozambique, or other power coming from dams and so on. I was explaining that the reason we have level 6 for the first time in Eskom's history and this country's history is because of the illegal industrial action that has been in place since the 22nd of June until today. This industrial action has worsened the situation in terms of the production of electricity by Eskom. And when we talk of level 1, 2, 3, or 4, each of those levels represents 1,000 megawatts that is taken out of the system. So what level 6 means is that 6,000 megawatts cannot be supplied by Eskom for reasons that I will explain in a moment. And where during winter, for example, today or yesterday, the demand is about 32,000 megawatts. Eskom will not be able to supply that 32,000. It will be able to supply 6,000 less than 32,000. And it doesn't mean that the whole country gets into a blackout. What it means is that on a rotational basis, each municipality that manages load shedding in that municipality, or in areas where Eskom manages the load shedding, you will have 2, 3, or 4 hours of load shedding, depending on the circumstances in a particular area, on a rotational basis, meaning electricity will be switched off, but switched back on as well. Eskom is in this position, as I said, because of the industrial action, which has meant that in many, many power stations, up to 90% of the staff could not attend to their duties at the power stations. They could not attend because of intimidation at their homes, intimidation through phone calls, and I will show you some pictures of the kind of damage that has been done as a result of petrol bombs and other incendiary devices being thrown at the homes of managers, at their cars, and in the power station itself in a moment. This intimidation, as I'm sure all South Africans will agree, is completely unacceptable. And it is primarily responsible for the country being where it is today and possibly tomorrow, although in the few hours that I have spent at Eskom today, I've been given the assurance that everything will be done to bring the country to normality as far as supply of electricity is concerned sooner rather than later. Some of you would have heard by now that as a result of extensive negotiations between some of the unions and the management team at Eskom, earlier today, an agreement was reached on the wage settlement that both parties will commit themselves to in due course. Agreement was also reached that these unions, who've been primarily involved in some of the activity that I am referring to, will request their members to return to work tomorrow. And so the recovery of Eskom plant and the various things that will have to be done to clean up plants and to get operations going will actually start on that basis. The intimidation that I'm referring to is going to be illustrated in a moment by some of the pictures that have been sent to the Eskom head office so that you can see for yourselves just a sample of some of the intimidatory activities that I referred to earlier on. A colleague will flight some of those slides right now so that you can actually see the pictures for yourselves. I'm just going to pause for a moment whilst that is being done.
While my colleague is trying to share the pictures, I shall inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that there will be some few hiccups due to the short notice to the meeting. Please go ahead, Magda. Thank you.
This is a home that was petrol bombed in the last few days by people who didn't want Eskom staff to go to work. Next slide, please. Again, another example of a house being petrol bombed as well. Next slide. Yet another example of the damage caused to a window through which this bomb was thrown. Next slide. Again, an example of damage caused in a house. Next. This is a vehicle being set alight outside a house with the electricity supply to the house being tampered with as well. You can see some vain efforts being made to put out the fire. Here's another example of that as well. There might be one or two more slides. Again, tampering with the electricity supply to the house. Vehicles being damaged and roads being blocked by dumping coal. That was a coal outside one of the power stations today, which has subsequently been cleared. Damage to what looks like a tire, which has been slipped. Again, the coal being dumped across the road. That's the last slide, but an interesting example that you should be aware of as well is where a senior operational manager, who was a woman, emerges from one of the shifts, goes to her car, and then finds that two of her tires, of the car's tires, were slashed, and alternate arrangements were made so that she could get home safely. Now, the question the country needs to ask of those who inspire this kind of activity is, in whose interest is this? Because electricity is crucial to every household. Electricity is crucial to the economy of this country. It's crucial to ensuring that jobs are retained by businesses in this country. And it is important for investors that we have some certainty about the electricity situation in this country as well, notwithstanding the historical shortages that we've had over a period of time. So what we have had, ladies and gentlemen, is that over a period of this past week or so, a number of units at each of the power stations, with one or two exceptions, have been seriously affected. Firstly, by the fact that there are not enough operational people in a plant. In one power station, I'm not going to name it, up for the entire period since the 22nd of June, over 90% of the staff did not come to work at all, which means that it is impossible to operate the units of that particular power station. Similar numbers range from 50% upwards at other units of other power stations as a result of the intimidation that the staff of Eskom had been subjected to. This is unacceptable in any democracy. And where these short-term interests, inspired either because wage negotiations were taking place or for some other reasons, which I leave you to speculate, is causing a huge amount of damage to South Africa's reputation, but also our ability to ensure that we continue to grow as an economy and continue to provide households with the electricity that they require, and importantly, industry with the electricity that they require as well. If we talk about a social compact or a social contract in this country, then certainly one of the things that all of us should agree, whether we are in business, in the unions, staff of Eskom, or any other concerned person in South Africa, is that we should not interfere in any way whatsoever with important entities like Eskom, which are the lifeblood, if you like, of the economy of this country. You will notice that in other parts of the world, similar things are happening, not necessarily because of intimidation, but some of you would have noticed that in Tokyo, the authorities announced that households must switch off lights and other electric gadgets. If they don't do enough of that switching off, some 37 million people will find themselves in a blackout of one kind or another. Similar things have been experienced in Rome, in Australia, in recent times, in the East Coast, and elsewhere in the world as well. So electricity and the lack of electricity can cause a huge amount of damage. Now, where do we go from here? We are hoping that all of the staff will return to work tomorrow, that the cleanup process and the restart of all of the normal operational processes will commence during the course of the day. Secondly, where the maintenance of units has been interrupted as a result of these intimidatory tactics and the lack of staff being able to enter the power stations, we'll have those maintenance activities commence tomorrow as well. Thirdly, as a consequence of that, more units will come online that have not been able to be attended to as a result of what has been going on for the past week. And although Eskom is saying that both from 4 o'clock today and indeed tomorrow as well, level 6 load shedding would actually occur, I'm hoping that all of us that constitute the Eskom community will work hard, will collaborate with each other in order that we can avert or avoid level 6 tomorrow. And that depends on the kind of cooperation that we get from all stakeholders within Eskom and those who do business with Eskom as well. So tomorrow, the CEO and his senior management will keep you informed about what progress is being made in terms of returning units to full functionality and whether they are able to get back to level 2 load shedding and get the operations of Eskom commenced again. Government on its part is doing everything possible to assist Eskom, its management team, and the Eskom staff in whatever way we can. And I want to in particular commend the kind of role that the South African Police Service has been playing, both to protect staff, but also to manage the pickets that various staff have been holding outside of power stations. So appreciation to the South African Police Service for the good work that they've done around the power stations to ensure that no further damage was actually done in that particular regard. We undertake to keep you informed of the progress being made, and if need be, a few times a day, the Eskom colleagues will have press briefings so that if there is something to report, you will be made aware of that sooner rather than later. Finally, an appeal to members of all the trade unions that are represented within Eskom itself. Now is not the time to interfere with the electricity supply, whatever the reason might be, and whatever the instigation might be as well. Now is the time to work with each other in the national interest, in the interest of the country, and in the interest of all 60 million South Africans. And I hope that where there are issues to be resolved, let's sit around a table, let's find constructive solutions to them, but not interfere with the operations of a sensitive entity like Eskom, which is battling every single day with very old coal-powered stations and a number of other activities that go around which impact upon the quality of coal, the supply of fuel oil, the procurement processes within Eskom, as the State Capture Commission has revealed as being areas of malfeasance historically within Eskom itself. So thank you very much for tuning in, so to speak, and Mr. Manchacha will then guide us in terms of any questions that we need to address.
Thank you, Mr. Gordhan. Colleagues, as I did indicate earlier, please do continue typing your questions on the chat box. Pravin Gordhan will answer all the questions that have been put to him. He will be assisted by my colleagues. Android Reuter is also in the room, and Rulani Matebula, you spoke to them both this morning. And let's repeat again, I will share this recording. Media Desk will send it by email and by WhatsApp as soon as we can after this briefing. I shall read now all the questions, and of course, all your further questions for the Minister that are not being answered here or that you have not been able to ask in this briefing can be sent to Richard Mantle at DPE. The first question comes from William Horn of Network Pravin Gordhan. Since power stations are national key points, why has government not enacted special provisions to protect these national assets? Please answer the question, Mr. Gordhan.
Let's take three at a time, Sekonati.
The next question comes from Chris Yelland of EE Publishers. Why should it be an unusual step for DPE Minister to speak to the public about Eskom? The last question for this round comes from Koskona Duma of Eyewitness News. The Minister, sorry, I keep getting distracted by emails that block my view, colleagues. Sorry, I apologize. What interventions has the Minister made to address the industrial action that's resulted in the colleagues, I apologize. There are so many emails blocking my view to read your questions. Please accept my apologies. I'm reading the last question. What interventions has the Minister made to address industrial action that's resulted in the recent out? Are you able to answer those three, Minister?
Let's start with the last one. In the issue of wage negotiations is the responsibility of the management team, and where they require a mandate, they receive their mandate from the board of Eskom. So the politicians don't get involved unless it's absolutely necessary. And there was that case in 2018 where there was a refusal to talk between the then Eskom management and the unions. And the only time I got involved was to bring them together and get them to sit around a table. And ultimately, they negotiated amongst themselves. So it's not my responsibility to get involved unless there are exceptional circumstances where there are communication gaps or other phenomena that are interfering with the process. Mr. Yellen's question, why unusual? Because Eskom has been very diligent in providing information on virtually a daily basis. And where there are exceptional challenges or news to be shared, or just ordinary news to be shared about the state of the system, the management team has been taking responsibility in that regard and doing absolutely excellently in keeping the country informed about what is actually going on. In relation to the national key points question, according to the legislation, it's if you like, the owner of the establishment that must take responsibility for the security of the entity concerned and its various facilities. And in this instance, there are plans within Eskom itself and different grades of security measures extending from level 1 to level 4 uninformed. And they have been diligently pursuing those standards that they have available to them. And as I pointed out earlier on, the South African Police Service needs to be commended for providing assistance to the Eskom management team to protect or to manage any exceptional situations. Your next three.
Thank you, Mr. Gordhan. The next question comes from Britain. I only have his first name. With the current crisis having been foreseen and forecast by many industry experts, why hasn't there been any material progress in increasing electricity provision? This situation is nothing new, he says. The next question comes from Etienne Rabas. Please do pardon me if I mispronounced your name, sir. Should Cyril not declare a state of emergency and bring the army in where required? The last question for this round also comes from Chris Yelland. Chris has got quite a lot of questions, Minister. Let's take these two and we will deal with Chris's questions in one go. Thank you.
I think we need a special session just for Chris now, Sekunati. So we must arrange that. In terms of states of emergency and the army being called out, you'll remember that when the July unrest, as it is now politely called, took place last year, the Army's facilities were made available to protect national key points, and Eskom power stations was amongst them. And I'm sure that the President would have applied his mind if he received any recommendation that the assistance of the Army would in fact be required. The energy crisis in South Africa, the previous question, is a well-known fact, and I agree with that. The IRP 19 is supposed to be addressing that crisis, but there's no doubt that we must admit to our own historical shortcomings. The shortage of electricity didn't start yesterday or 3 years ago. It's been around for some time, as has load shedding itself. And what we now have is a clear trajectory in terms of meeting both the energy requirements of the country on the one hand, but also undertaking the just energy transition on the other hand as well. And if the right kind of investments take place, both by government and the private sector and other interested parties, in the next 18 months or so, South Africa will certainly find itself in a better place. And one excellent example of an initiative in this regard is making available land that is surplus land, if you like, around Eskom power stations that is owned by Eskom. And we announced this late last year. That has come to excellent fruition now, where the land that was made available was oversubscribed. And as the CEO announced, pretty soon, some 1,800 megawatts of investment will take place on that land once the formalities have been completed. And what's interesting about this particular initiative is that, firstly, there's no government guarantees required. Secondly, there's no power purchase agreements required. Those who invest in these IPP installations will be responsible for producing their energy, transmitting it via the Eskom transmission grid, and supplying it to their own customers as they have contracted with them. And that might be the beginning of a new era in terms of how to develop models for investment in renewable energy as we go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Gordhan, I can assure you that Richard Mantu indeed had your promise to Chris Yelland. I shall make the introductions and share the communications for him to take it from there. Now let's answer Chris's questions. As DPE is the shareholder ministry to whom Eskom reports, and as this is a shareholder matter, please can the DPE minister advise, 1, when will DPE minister approve the appointment of the directors of the National Transmission Company South Africa, or is there some problem in this regard? The next question, approximately when is the National Transmission Company South Africa likely to receive a transmission license from the regulator? The third and last question from Chris in this round is approximately when is likely that the National Transmission Company will be operational noting that the DPE's Eskom roadmap indicated the end of December 2021. Over to you, Mr. Gordhan.
No, thanks for those questions, Chris. The directors of the transmission company, we're going through our own governance processes within government itself. So sooner rather than later, and certainly before the end of July, we'll confirm the board of the transmission company. Secondly, in relation to the license being granted to the transmission company, as you know, that lies with the regulator, and I have no influence on the regulator whatsoever. But what I can do is write to the regulator and say, speed up your process so that we don't have to have extraordinary lengths of time being taken for an administrative matter such as that particular question. In terms of the operations of the transmission company, there's a kind of de facto operation, if you like, that is already in place. And the de jure operation, meaning the legal operation, will come into place as soon as the regulator grants the license. But we are as impatient as Chris Yellen would be in terms of getting this process going so that we can also learn lessons from what is an interesting new development within the electricity industry in South Africa as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordhan. The next question comes from Johan Peter Maybeck. Good day, Mr. Gordhan. How far are we from a total blackout? Breton has also asked, surely national key points such as power stations are, as well as key staff, should be given protection and security from these criminal threats. If this is not the case, why not? I will take one of Kopano Kumbi's two questions for this round. She is from Newsroom Africa. How far are you helping Eskom get more power onto the grid? This is a long-standing request from Eskom. Mr. Gordhan, please answer those and we will tackle Kopano's second question afterwards.
So let's take Kopano's first question. Except for the initiative around the land that Eskom owns, the purchase of electricity or the acquisition of electricity is the responsibility of the Department of Energy. And that happens in the context, as I said earlier on, of the IRP 19, which my colleague Minister Mantar said is subject to review given the new circumstances that we find ourselves in at the moment as well. So I think that's best addressed in that direction. But obviously what we are saying is that this experiment by Eskom in Mpumalanga begins to offer new opportunities for investment in IPPs in one form or another within close proximity to where currently established transmission lines actually exist. You would also know that to put in new transmission lines and ensure connectivity, for example, from the Northern Cape, would require over a period of time investments somewhere between 100 billion and 150 billion rands. And that is going to be work in progress, but probably take a decade before that kind of investment takes place as well. But we certainly agree that we need to speed up processes that will bring renewable energy into, or new forms of energy into operation. And in this regard, gas generated electricity is also another possibility that both that government as a whole is looking at and Eskom is looking at as well in terms of repurposing some of their power stations. And gas is considered in South Africa in the context of climate change as a step down from coal-powered or fossil fuel-powered electricity, which has obviously huge amounts of carbon emissions that it has to cope with. In terms of the previous question, how far are we from a total blackout? If I'm not representing Mr. Director properly, he can intervene in a moment, but we are nowhere near close to a total blackout. Remember, a total blackout occurs when the transmission grid completely collapses, as it did in California and to an extent in Texas last year. We are not in that position, as we've repeatedly said, and Eskom colleagues have put this out repeatedly as well. The precise purpose of load shedding and the stages of load shedding is to ensure the integrity and stability of the transmission grid. And Eskom is world class in terms of managing the safety of the grid, which means that there is no possibility at all of a total blackout unless something exceptional happens that none of us have anticipated. In terms of protecting staff, we're talking about thousands of staff at the moment in terms of key operators within the power stations, and protecting each of them is going to be at an individual level difficult. The real question is, why should they be intimidated in the first place? That's the real question. And the question should be addressed to those who've inspired this kind of intimidatory activity. And you saw in the photographs, which one of us would like our homes to be petrol bombed? Which one of us would like our vehicles to be burnt down? Which one of us would like to receive intimidatory phone calls from no caller ID phones? Ask ourselves those questions. Who are the people who are generating these kinds of totally unacceptable forms of intimidation? And really, I think all of us as South Africans need to turn against the intimidators themselves, not the intimidated in this particular instance, and ask some very serious questions about what is the intent. Is it just about wage negotiations, or is it something beyond that as well that is at play at this particular point in time? So I think the real issue is that we need to have peaceful activities in the labor context, if and when that is actually required, and there should be no resort to any form of intimidatory activity at all against the staff of Eskom or any other entity that is absolutely crucial to our economy and the well-being of our own people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordhan.
We should take the last three questions now, Zekonati.
Minister, we have just closed the chat and we have questions that are queuing. So let me read as many of these as possible. Kopano's last question is, many South Africans are aware of the situation at Eskom and remain concerned with how much longer they must endure load shedding. When will we get meaningful solutions implemented? Duncan McLeod of Tech Central wants to know, what are the minister's colleagues in the security cluster doing to bring this situation under control? Is there an argument to be made that the army should be deployed at Eskom power stations? We could say you have already answered that, Minister, in your reference earlier to power stations, to security. Pulegani Makubane from Fin24 wants to know what engagements, if any, is your department and Eskom have had with the police service about the nature of these protests and attempts at intimidation. And he says the images appear to fall into the criminal realm, which are beyond labor disputes operations. I shall take Chris Yelland's last question. The energy availability factor in the DPE's Eskom roadmap was stated to rise to from 65% to 75, 80, and 85% within a few years from 2019. In reality, the AFF has declined from 65% to 60%. What was the aspiration in the DPE Eskom roadmap? Not unrealistic from the very start. He asked, was it not unrealistic from the very start? Please answer those, Mr. Gordhan, and then we can close with the last round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the EAF, I mean, in a perfectly normal, if you like, operational environment, EAFs of 75 or even beyond 75 into the 80s is totally acceptable and in accordance with world-class standards. In our case, I think you need to take into account, number one, the age factor of the power plants. Number two, the historical negligence of maintenance during critical years, during the state capture period. And that's in the report of Chief Justice Zondo, for those who are interested. Thirdly, some levels of inexperience amongst operational staff that is now being attended to, and special efforts that are being put into that particular area. So there should be some improvement. We might not get to 75%, but this is a matter that is under constant review between DPE as a shareholder and the Eskom management team and board over a period of time. On the question of interacting with the South African Police Service, the CEO and his colleagues have met with the South African Police Service at the highest level and made them aware of some of the challenges that Eskom is faced with. And in the first instance, during the last week, since the 22nd of June, we've had, as I said, excellent cooperation, or Eskom has had excellent cooperation from the police service. And now we need to move to the next stage, where those who are engaged in what are, as you've correctly pointed out, criminal activities are brought to book in one form or another. There is going to be a meeting with the security cluster in this particular regard, and to then review the kind of assistance that Eskom requires in the kind of context that we find ourselves in, and some of the challenges that we've experienced over the last week or so. And then Kopano, when would we have a satisfactory situation? I would think that if we speed up some of the processes and avoid some of the red tape, if not just scrap the damn red tape, forgive my poetry, then we will be able to move much faster. And within the next 2 to 3 years, we will begin to see a relative level of stability as far as energy security is concerned. And let me assure you that the government as a whole recognizes the importance of energy security and is doing everything possible to amend policies, to increase, for example, investments in IPPs up to 100 megawatts, to cut red tape in various areas. And Operation Vulindlela, that is based in the presidency, is doing an exceptional amount of work in that particular area as well. So that's extremely good and urgent work that is happening now in order to facilitate quicker investments in this particular area. Thank you, Sikanati.
Mr. Gordhan, thank you. I will only read 2 questions that I cannot leave out. One is from Samkele Maseko of the SABC. He wants to know if you have spoken to the president about stage 6 load shedding, and what are the president's views on stage 6 load shedding. The last question I will read out for you is again from Chris Yeland. Is it not time for government to establish a national electricity emergency council similar to the council established to deal with the COVID crisis? This must have special emergency powers to lift the red tape and those unhelpful regulations that hold things back, and to promulgate emergency regulations to facilitate immediate action to end load shedding fast in a kind of Marshall Plan or national priority for the government. And thus, that must involve all stakeholders. Can you answer those? The rest of the questions really relate to security, which we have already spoken to. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that Eskom will release a statement. I see that the labor unions have published a joint statement. Eskom will release a statement as soon as possible. Mr. Gordhan, can you answer these and then we close the...
No, the president arrived back from the G7 meeting earlier today, and he is fully briefed on this matter. And if if Samkelo wants to know what the president's views are, then he should approach the presidency's spokesperson, who is the most appropriate person to respond to that question. The second question in relation to the Energy Council that Chris speaks of, in essence, we have had over the last few weeks that kind of discussion that Chris is actually referring to, and I'll certainly take on board some of the thoughts that he has and discuss them with my colleagues as well. But there's no doubt that, as I said earlier on, government is absolutely keen and understands the urgency of ensuring that this country does have energy security sooner rather than later, and also recognizes that we cannot be pedantic about the way we approach this question, that we need to demonstrate urgency on the one hand, but also flexibility and adaptability on the other hand. And those are the questions that we are addressing. And I'm sure as time goes, we will make some announcements in that particular regard. Finally, let me thank all of you for both your questions and your interest. And let me assure you that TPE will be in constant touch with both the board and the management of Eskom. And the Eskom colleagues will keep you informed of progress. And I'm hoping that sometime tomorrow they can tell all of us that the situation has radically improved. And finally, can I appeal to all the people who have a presence either in Eskom or around Eskom, please think about the country and think about our future rather than think about oneself only. And if we do that, we can move to greater heights in terms of energy security in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gordhan. Ladies and gentlemen, we will again release this recording as soon as we have been able to download it. Further questions on the DPE and what the minister has had to say and has not said yet can be sent to Richard Mantu of the Department of Public Enterprises. Eskom, I repeat again, will publish a statement on the wage talk, on the wages. We have seen a statement already from the National Union of Mine Workers and NUMSA. I thank you again for attending this meeting at such short notice. Have a great evening.